The gates of the Arctic have opened, and winter looks poised to pour into Minnesota late this week. So we'll be talking today, Kenny Blumenfeld, a climatologist, and I, Jim Dubois, to discuss the specifics, ponder what it takes for a real winter, which we haven't seen yet, and herald a new unofficial weather record for Minnesota. First of all, Kenny, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Jim?
You know, I'm great. We're here at our undisclosed outdoor location somewhere in South Minneapolis, and it is a mild day. The sun was briefly out, although we've seen it vanish now behind a cloud. But so, Kenny, are you telling me that the boring weather we've experienced here for multiple days is soon to come to an end?
We have some excitement, indeed. I think the most exciting thing first is that we can officially announce a new record holder for Minnesota's annual precipitation.
Ah, and where is that?
Okay, so the town of Harmony in southeast Minnesota actually cracked the 60-inch threshold, which is unbelievable. So we had discussed this possibility in recent podcasts.
Right.
But basically what happens is we were getting daily reports out of Caledonia, and so it was much easier to
both
stay.
in southeast Minnesota.
They're
right.
they're a very short drive apart from each other. So Caledonia had looked like it had set the record, but we had a long delay for Harmony. The observer sends in forms at the end of the month, and they have to get coded by the Weather Service office in La Crosse. Now, let's not bore everybody to tears with this, but we had a lag in our understanding of how much precipitation fell at Harmony. So, to recap, the old record was 56 inches, 56.24 inches at Waseca. That record was set in 2016. We thought that Caledonia broke the record with 57.97 inches. However, the record is now held by Harmony, 60.21 inches.
Wow.
It's almost official. However, there's a government shutdown that's affecting all federal employees, and if it's not critical life safety issue, the Weather Service can't respond to it, so they can't verify this record with the state climatology office until the shutdown ends. That said, the observers at Harmony have been at it for years, and they're viewed as pretty good observers, so it's likely that we will verify this. 60 inches, just put that in perspective. That's the amount of precipitation you get in a typical year near the Gulf Coast.
Wow.
In the deep south and parts of Louisiana, parts of Mississippi, 55, 60 inches. Those are the kinds of values. So, I mean, of course, this is a record, so it's not like this is something that's happening all the time or happening everywhere. But other items of note, at Harmony this year, there were 17 days with 1 inch of precipitation, or 17 1-inch precipitation days. That's insane.
Wow.
So just imagine an inch of rain falling 17 times. And this is actually an inch or more. I believe for 2-inch precipitation events, there were actually 7, maybe 8 of those. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling. There were no real big sort of blockbuster type rains, which you usually see with the big record breakers. But instead, it was Harmony just kind of chugging away, nickel and diming its way to the top. It's insane. I mean, we had thought, and we talked about this, Jim, we had thought we wouldn't see the Waseca record broken for a while, because that record had sort of demolished the old record too. And when that happens, you sort of bow to the king or queen, and you say, look, you get the throne for a while. So to have it broken by 2 different cities 2 years later is kind of boggles the mind, and I think we're done assuming that records are safe.
Wow. Well, that is amazing. So we assume once the National Weather Service is back at full force after the government shutdown ends, that record will be certified.
That's our assumption. Yeah, and it's interesting because we already went down and met with the Weather Service before the shutdown to pre-certify Caledonia. So
wow.
You know, this is kind of climate nerdery, but it's a high drama in the climate world, Jim. So then you're talking about something that's possibly as exciting as that. Well, there couldn't be. Might as well end the show. But, you know, we've been talking about the lack of winter.
Yes.
And it looks like, I think winter's actually got its eye on Minnesota.
Really? And this has nothing to do with the storm that went through parts of the Midwest and is on its way now to what, Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, no, it has nothing to do with that,
Yeah.
you know, that record snowfall in the St. Louis area and parts of Missouri where they had, 8 to 15 inches. No, that was a good snowstorm, though, and many of us up here quite envious. There are parts of Missouri, this is embarrassing, there are parts of Missouri that have more snow now this season than parts of Minnesota.
That has to be quite unusual.
That distinction has our name on it. Yeah, it certainly has happened before, and the season isn't over, and the chances are we'll probably end up beating them. But to be halfway through winter roughly, and to be losing to Central Missouri is a little odd.
Right.
Yeah, so no, it doesn't have anything to do with that weather system. Instead, if you were to just sort of imagine, and this is podcast land, right? So people have to use their imaginations. They don't get to look at images while we talk. Well, they could, but just imagine, you've got the United States and you've got Canada. And just say you could take Canada all the way up to the Arctic Circle. And just imagine that there's sort of this pretty tight circle of cold that really only covers the northernmost latitudes in Canada. And now just imagine that this line is on the move, moving, 500 miles a day south or so. And so it's starting to take over more and more of Canada. In the middle of this week, it's going to be about 3/4 of the way through Canada. It's going to be perched pretty close to the U.S.-Canadian border. And this is related to where a strong cold front is surging south, and there's kind of a series of weather systems, low-pressure systems, that are going to track right along that boundary. And one of them is going to drag that front through first the northeastern half of Minnesota. So they're going to be the first to get cold, and they're going to be the coldest.
Wow. Well, they're used to it, at least. I mean, it's kind of been a more traditional winter for northeastern Minnesota, hasn't it?
A bit more. They're having a
here
winter.
At least, right?
I mean,
right.
They've had their warm days too, but at least they've got snow on the ground. For most of the listeners in southern Minnesota, there's no snow right now.
Right.
So round number one is going to bring some snow to the northeastern part of Minnesota, and it's going to drive the cold air up that way first. So in the Twin Cities, by the end of the week, temperatures might be in the low teens or single digits at night, but the real heart of the cold air is going to remain north of the border. Then another system, which looks like it's going to pass somewhere to our south, and this one's going to produce snow. We don't know if it'll hit Minnesota. It's way too far out to tell, because we're talking about next weekend, so the pre-Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend. But that system's the real deal. It's going to be connected, unlike some of the previous systems, it's going to be connected to that deep pool of cold air off to the north. And so when it passes by, we're going to get some cold air. Now, here's the thing, Jim. What does cold air mean to you? What does that mean to you?
To me, Kenny, that's a good question. Now, right now, I believe, I think we're about 34 degrees out here in this undisclosed location.
Yes.
This, to me, is not cold. For this time of the year, it's tolerable. It's actually kind of enjoyable. It's nice to be outside.
It's wimpy.
Yeah, to me, cold, certainly anything below zero. And even in the teens, if you toss in a wind chill, that's uncomfortable to me.
Okay, now when you think about cold, I'm asking this as a climatologist, are you thinking of some kind of average or normal for that time of year or that season in your head? Or are you just thinking of some physiological response that you have?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So let's think about that. So because cold is relative depending upon the season. A 65-degree day in mid-July could be cold for some people, for the high temperature at least. I would say I'd put a seasonal component to this. And if it's January or February, I would say what I would consider to be cold. That threshold lowers a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would say that something below zero is definitely cold, no matter what part of winter it is. But even this time of the year, I guess my tolerance builds a little bit. So maybe I'd say in January, I won't consider anything really cold unless it's lower than plus 10.
Okay, all right, that's fair. Well, I think then by that definition, cold is definitely going to be on its way. I think one of the questions that I have, so again, we don't have the images here, but imagine sort of a northwest to southeast oriented ribbon. And it basically goes across Minnesota. So it comes out of Manitoba, crosses Minnesota, kind of ends up down by Rochester, and then, heads down towards kind of Chicago. On the northeast side of that ribbon, that's where the deep cold air is going to reside. And this ribbon, over the next couple weeks, might fluctuate as far southwest as, say, Nebraska, which would put us more deeply in the cold air. So one of the things that's to be determined is how cold are we going to get? As we talked about last time, there's not a lot of snow on the land in southern Minnesota. And if that second storm system, the one that we're talking about Martin Luther King weekend, if that doesn't deliver snow, that's going to kind of take a bite out of the depth of the cold air when it does arrive. So, this looks like there are going to be waves of kind of cold air for, a week or more. But I would say that as it stands now, I would imagine in the Twin Cities, we'll go to maybe single digits below zero a couple nights, but have our high temperatures kind of stuck and not much higher than the teens. And in some of the coldest air, maybe even lower than that, closer to the single digits above zero. So not like a record-shattering cold. I think parts of northeastern Minnesota will probably have no problem getting to the 20s and even the 30s below when the deepest part of the cold air moves in. But this is not going to be a historic, record-setting cold outbreak. It doesn't look that way yet. We would really need, I think, more snow and an even more pronounced surge of Arctic air. But, hey, it's going to get cold. That's a change.
Right, exactly.
It's a change.
Well, let me ask you this. Speaking of Martin Luther King weekend, on the 20th, a week from the day we're recording this podcast, we have a total eclipse of the moon. And there's an event coming up for that at the Bell Museum on the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota. And so any speculation, Kenny, about sky conditions on the night of that eclipse, a week from tonight, the 20th?
My hunch is that if the maps are correct and all the voodoo that we do to understand the weather in the future, I think that if all of that is correct, which it probably won't be, I would imagine that we'll have clearing conditions by Sunday.
Okay, well, this is good. That makes me feel good because I really want to be able to see that eclipse through a telescope.
Yeah,
so
it should be.
Crossing my fingers.
Yeah, to have the cold air, you often need, you need the high pressure, sinking air, and clearing skies. So that bodes reasonably well, but, it looks like, a day or so before that is when we'll have that storm system coming through the region to our south. And, of course, this far out, you might as well give or take a day. So we could be a day off, and you might as well give or take several hundred miles. So, yeah, I'd say that's to be determined. But as of right now, your eclipse viewing looks okay for Sunday night.
All right. Well, that makes me feel good. Something else we should touch on. We just noted an anniversary of what was called, I think, the storm of the century in 1975, a huge blizzard in Minnesota. And I have a vivid memory of it because I was a senior in high school at the time of the storm. And, we would listen to the radio reports always whenever there was a snowstorm of schools being shut down throughout the state and eagerly awaiting the news that the Minneapolis public schools would be closed. And of course, being sorely disappointed the vast majority of the times. But this actually closed down the Minneapolis public schools. That only happened twice in all the years I attended them. So that's why it stands out in my memory.
Oh, that's interesting because in my childhood, they closed school about 15 or 20 times.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, we softened, and we also got into, routinely harsh winters, too.
Right.
I mean, in 1982, we had back-to-back 17-inch snowfalls, and in January of '82. Yeah, this was a big blizzard in 1975. Was this the Super? We also called the Super Bowl blizzard.
I believe the Super Bowl blizzard. Yeah, the storm of the century. That was another one too. But of course, things have that's all relative to that particular time.
You don't get to declare something the storm of the century when the century's 3/4 over. That's not fair to what comes next. That was a big blizzard. I was 2 at the 1.5 at the time, so I don't have a vivid memory of it. But it was a wide swath of snow, heavy snow all over Minnesota. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of vehicles stuck and or crashed into things and spun off the road. Schools closed across the state. Many of the roads closed. We had winds that were commonly in open areas, 50 to 70 miles an hour. So it was a raging blizzard. It also was a fairly long affair. It lasted over 24 hours. And if you think about it, think of how fragile our rush hour is. You throw down 1.5 inches of snow right at rush hour and everything falls apart. Imagine then, an 8-inch or an 8-hour snowfall usually exerts even more influence. But when you've got 24 to 48 hours of raging heavy snow with strong winds and some sleet mixed in southern Minnesota, yeah, you got problems. And that was definitely a doozy. There's a few. That's one of them. There's quite a few historic weather events that I wish there was a way to be able to experience them, but you can't go back in time, and you can always look forward to whatever unknown events await us in the future.
Right. Well, Kenny, as someone who loves winter, I'm sure you're kind of excited about these colder temperatures. After all, you made a movie, The Story of Winter. You could have done the story of summer, the story of spring. You chose winter, so you've got to like this. This winter so far has to have kind of been a bit disappointing to you.
Yeah, no, that's the good thing is I always like the statistics of it. So it's like being a sports fan. There's something to fascinate me no matter what's happening, even if my team isn't doing so well.
Right.
And I would say for this winter, yeah, I would like to see more snow. But on the other hand, we've broken some records, and that's kept it interesting. And there's always this other hook of, is it El Nino? Is it climate change? Is it both? And that kind of thing keeps it interesting. I will say, Jim, these sort of turnarounds that you get during a warm winter, we've seen it before. I would not be surprised if we kind of finish out January a little bit cold, and at some point near the end of January or early February, flip back to the warm, predominantly mild winter, and that we really don't remember this as much of a cold outbreak at all. That's kind of my guess.
Okay.
But I would love to be wrong. We just don't have a lot of examples historically of the switch being flipped this far into winter, where you go from a warm winter to a cold one and it just sticks. But, could happen. It is Minnesota, and it is 2019.
Right. Yes.
So I'm not counting it out.
So probably safe to say, make sure your cold weather gear is ready, and get ready for a drop in the temperatures here that you will definitely feel in the next few days.
Yeah, I suppose we should mention, because the people won't hear from us until probably near when that cold air is on. But next weekend, that weekend of Martin Luther King Day, I would say pay attention, because weather conditions will be changing and temperatures should be dropping. And it does look like, whether it snows or not, it's going to be kind of a windy transition. So that means wind chills and pretty dangerous conditions to be stuck outside in. So, yeah, definitely be prepared. It's Minnesota. It is winter.
Well, we'll talk about it next week. We'll see how cold things really got. And we'll check in with you coming up in a few days, Kenny.
All right. Very good. Good talking with you, Jim.
Have a great week.
You also.